Hi Alan. I wanted to present this information to you in an online context because I've really enjoyed learning more about that as I've read and um, played around with um, using online learning. So I thought I'd do that for this presentation. I also wanted to incorporate a range of elements that I've used to hopefully successfully blend online learning into the course um, that will help students achieve success within the course. So the reason why I wanted to use blended learning when designing the course called Occupation and Productivity was that there is a strong shift towards web-based collaboration within health. Um, and so we see that within telehealth and within e-health. So occupational therapists are increasingly involved in telehealth. So they exchange information, so clinical information about clients. Um, but they also use it and even more so now, um, in online continuing professional development because the OT profession is now one where we're expected to be accredited and to engage in continuing professional development. So the other reason is that I think that the OT education needs to embrace using these technologies so that we can improve our students their skills for working in a digital environment. So there's a lot of evidence that connects student engagement and success, and I think one of the areas of evidence that's emerging is blended learning, because that offers students increased flexibility. They're able to access resources in their own time. Many students are working, students are mature age, and so they have lots of competing um, constraints on their time, and so online learning and blended learning allows for that greater flexibility, but it also can integrate learning in outcomes in a more interesting and connected way for students. So the elements that I'd like to talk about for incorporating in a blended learning context is not only the alignment of the program with the course learning objectives, but also looking at graduate attributes, looking at assessments, looking at the content of the course and resources, and the Blackboard site. So I'll address each of those. In terms of the intended learning outcomes, the first four learning outcomes are really focus on building practice skills. So they're skills in analysis and evaluation of a client's work capacity and formulation of a plan for rehabilitation or return to work. So this is a huge area of practice within occupational therapy. So we've really weighted that more heavily, and that's in module 1. So if I just click out of this and go into the Blackboard site, in module 1 it's a real emphasis on the traditional area of work rehabilitation. So when we look at productivity, the traditional area is looking at work and clients who've been injured at work or people with a disability who are entering the workforce. So we are looking at building the students' skills in these areas, and we've weighted this particular module more heavily than the next module, which looks at what is productivity outside of paid employment, because it is an area where students will move into and seek employment. So in terms of how I have set up the course to address these intended learning outcomes, I think that if I go back into the Blackboard site and we have a look at week 4, because those first 4 learning outcomes are very practical, as I've said. So what I've tried to do is set this course up where there's lots of resources that the students can access. So there's required readings that we've embedded into the Blackboard site that they can just click onto. There's also recommended readings that the students can just look at, particularly if they're focusing on a particular area in their assessment and they need to do additional readings for that. And also in their preparation for their labs. Now each week after the lecture, students engage in a 2-hour lab session. There's 6 of these initially in the first module, and they're very practical. So in week 4, the students will be looking at assessing a workstation. So a practical way of doing that, we've embedded into the Blackboard site an example of a computer workstation assessment that hopefully is coming up. It's a bit slow to load, but if I just make that a little bit bigger so you can have a look at that. So this is an example of a self-assessment checklist. So if the students were working in an area of practice where they were seeing someone who had perhaps a repetitive strain injury, they'd been off work for a period of time because they were unable to continue with their keyboarding, then this could be an assessment that students use. Now this is a self-assessment, so we ask students to complete this assessment in their own on their own workstation, so usually at home. So they complete this and they might be looking at, for example, when they're seated at their workstation, are their shoulders relaxed? Are their wrists in a functional position? Are their hips slightly higher than their knees? They just tick these off and comment on them. And at the end, they might like to look at perhaps recommendations that they could perhaps modify the way they sit. They might need a new chair, or they might need to increase the lighting or the ventilation in their work area. So this is a very practical form that students can fill in.